Good afternoon, Year 3, and welcome to today's geography lesson. We are going to be looking in depth at rivers. So, without further ado, let me share my screen so we can get started. So our learning objective today, we are learning to describe the different parts of a river. By the end of this lesson, we will be able to know that rivers often start high in mountains where there is heavy rainfall. We will also be able to label and describe the upper, middle, and lower parts of a river. Now, first thing we're going to do is recap what we have learnt last week. So I'm going to read out the question to you and read out the answers. You pause the video and shout out your answer. Are you ready? I hope so. So, question number 1. How many natural wonders of the world are there? Is it A, 5, B, 6, or C, 7? Pause the video. Fantastic. Hopefully you got the answer. The answer is C, 7 natural wonders. Remember, when you see this pause sign, pause the video once I've read the question to you. What is the name of the natural wonder? Of this natural wonder. So looking at this picture, what is the name of this natural wonder? We did learn about it last week. Is it A, Victoria Falls, B, Niagara Falls, or C, Kawasan Falls? Pause the video. Okay, you should have got the correct answer, which is A, Victoria Falls. Hopefully you got that right, but don't worry if you didn't, because you can always go back and have a look through that video. And you can find Victoria Falls in Zambia. Now, question number 3. The aurora borealis is more commonly known by what other name? What is another name for the aurora? Pause the video so that you can answer that question. Okay, the answer to the question was the Northern Lights is another name for the aurora. Question number 4. True or false? The Great Barrier Reef is one giant long reef. Pause the video to answer that question. False. The Great Barrier Reef is not one giant long reef. It's lots of small interconnected reefs. There are loads. I think it was over 2,000, I think they said in the last week's video. There are loads of little interconnected reefs. Question number 5. Which country borders Mount Everest? Is it A, Canada, B, Colombia, or C, China? Pause the video so that you can answer that question. The correct answer was China. And you can have an extra point if you can remember the other country that Mount Everest borders. It's between China and another country. Pause the video if you want to have an extra point. The answer was Nepal, or Nepal, however you say it. Okay, so here are our key vocabulary for today. We're going to be using these words in this lesson. So we've got river. I say it and then you say it. River. Fantastic. A river is a large natural stream of water. So rivers are natural. They naturally occur. You can't make them. And it's just a large natural stream of water that is flowing. Meander. And for this, you can see the winding meanders of the river. Meander just means a winding curve or bend in a river. So you can see all these different bends and curves in the rivers. Then that's how we would describe those curves. We would say the river meanders, or the river is meandering. Our next word is source. Source. Now you're probably thinking that this word is like light source, which we use in science, but in geography, and in particular for this lesson on rivers, a source is a place where the river starts. So all rivers must have a source. Usually the source is high up in the mountains when heavy rainfall occurs, collects, and then starts the river's journey. Erosion. Erosion. Now, erosion happens. What erosion means, it's the wearing away of materials by wind or water. Last week we talked about the Grand Canyon and how it was formed due to erosion from the Colorado River. So water can erode rock and land, just like we looked at in our processes of fossilization, which you've now done in outdoor learning as well as science. So hopefully you remember that. So what is a river? Now you're probably all thinking, I know what a river is, it's water. But there's more to it than that, and there's lots of different parts of a river, so we're going to be learning about that today. So what is a river? A river is a large natural stream of water flowing into the channel, flowing in a channel into the sea, or a lake, or another river. It can also flow into the ocean. So the channel is just the path of the river. So think of the channel as the shape of the river. So a river channel is the shape of the whole river. Some channels have lots of meanders, so they have lots of bends, others don't. So where do they start? Hopefully you've remembered because I've mentioned it already in this video, but rivers usually begin in upland areas such as mountains, hills, areas that are quite high up. And when rain falls on high ground, rivers, sorry I've blocked it with this picture, when rain falls on high ground and begins to flow downhill, they always flow downhill because of gravity. Some rivers begin in mountains or hills where rainwater collects and forms small channels. Rivers end in the ocean or the sea. I don't know why that is spelled like that. Okay, so a channel is the length of water and also the shape of the river. So a river is often divided into 3 parts or stages, and it has features that are specific to each stage, which we are going to learn about later on in this lesson. First thing I want you to do is just repeat after me. There are 3 stages. The first stage is upper course. Upper course. Fantastic. Stage number 2 is middle course. Middle course. And stage number 3 is the lower course. Lower course. So think of it this way. Upper course is where the river begins its journey, usually in the mountains. Middle course is where the river starts to meander. You can see it starting to bend. And the lower course is the end of the river's journey, and it often meets the mouth of the river, which is where it flows into another river. It can flow into the ocean or it can flow into the sea. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you a video that explains the 3 parts of a river's journey in more detail. So bear with me one moment. And let me just get that up for you. Okay, so let's reshare my screen so that you can see this video.
I'm in Sweden, following the route of a river that flows across the country and out to the sea. I'm starting from the beginning of the river, which we call the source, here in the mountains. Rivers often start in upland areas like this, from lakes, marshes and glaciers, or even springs that bubble out of the ground. A river has a channel with banks on both sides and a bed. Around the main channel of the river is the floodplain, where the river expands when it floods. Rivers always flow downhill because of gravity, going where there is the least resistance, so they meander or move around obstacles like large rocks and hills. Over time, they erode or wear away soil and rock to create canyons and gorges. My kayak is being pushed along by the water as it gradually flows downhill. The water looks quite flat here, but in other places it can be much steeper, like waterfalls! Rivers like the Amazon and Nile are nearly 7,000 kilometers long and can be several kilometers wide in some places. Some rivers flow into lakes or other larger rivers. Finally, I've reached the mouth of the river, which in this case flows out to the sea. I think I'm gonna need a bigger boat.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. So as you could see, the river started from the source. Then it had its upper course where it flowed through high mountains and valleys. Sometimes there may even be a waterfall. When it reaches its middle course, it starts to meander. So it starts to go through lots of bends and winds and curves. This is also when the river starts flowing fastest. Once it reaches the lower course, the river starts to slow down. It becomes much wider because it erodes the land around the river, around the channel. And then it reaches the mouth, and the mouth of the river is the end of the river's journey, and it usually joins onto a larger pool of water. So, your first activity, I have a river, and it's got some labels on it. It's got label number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. What I need you to do, using these keywords here, I need you to write down number 1 and match up the keyword to number 1. So if I thought that number 1 was the mouth of the river, I would write number 1, mouth. I know it's not, because I know the mouth of the river is where it usually meets a larger pool of water. So what you're going to need, you need to get a pen and paper, and you're just going to write down number 1, and then you're going to write down the keyword that matches the word of where the river is, okay? The different parts of the river. So I need you to label the different parts of the river and match them with their numbers. Can you pause the video so that you can do that now? Fantastic. Hopefully you've done that by now. And just to show you the answers for that, number 1 was the mouth of, sorry, not the mouth, I'm confusing myself now because I said it as an example. Number 1 is the source. Okay, it's the river's source. It's where the river starts. Number 2 is the upper course. Okay, it's when the river starts to flow downhill. It's usually quite a steep gradient because it's flowing through mountains. There may even be a waterfall at some point. And then the river starts to widen and it reaches its middle course. Number 3 is middle course. When the river reaches its middle course, it starts to meander. You can see it's meandering because it's got lots of winds and bends. Okay, number 4 is the lower course. You can see the channel has got much wider. The river is widening because the land around it is being eroded by the water. And finally, number 5 is the end of the river's journey. It is the mouth of the river, where it joins on to a larger pool of water. Okay, hopefully you got that right at home. Now, what I'm going to do for this next part, I'm just going to explain in more detail the different parts of a river. And then you're going to do your second activity. So first, starting off, we know the river comes from a source. Once it comes from the source, we say the first part of its journey is the upper course. And this describes a young river's journey. The upper course is when the river is young. The river here is smaller and usually has a rapid tumbling flow that cuts a narrow channel through rocky hills or mountains. And if you just look at this picture, if you look at this picture, you can see it's quite narrow, the channel of this river. But you can see the water, as you can see, it's white water. It's moving quite quickly and rapidly through the channel. And it's also got quite steep gradients. You can see here, there's a very steep drop. And that's because the upper course, or a young river, usually is flowing through rocky hills and high mountains. The fast-flowing river can create waterfalls where it carves out layers of soft rock and leaves a cliff of hard rock standing. Waterfalls commonly form where the water rushes down steep hillsides in upland areas and quickly erodes the rocks. So, do you recognize this waterfall? Hopefully you do, because it was one of our 7 natural wonders. It is, in fact, I hope you said Victoria Falls then. It is, in fact, Victoria Falls. Looking at Victoria Falls, you can see that actually there was a channel here. And there was a river here, and there still is a river, but you can see that water is quickly following a steep gradient, and the rock has been eroded here. You can see that there's rock on the other side. So you can see the middle part has been eroded, and that's by the quick flowing water from the upper course. Moving on to the next part of a river's journey is the middle course. I want you to say middle course. And this is the middle-aged river. In this, think of it as an adult. The young river is a baby. A middle-aged river, or the middle course, is when the river is an adult, okay? So probably in their 30s or 40s. Now, in the middle course, the river has lots more energy, okay? It's got lots more energy and it's got a larger amount of water. And this is because of erosion that has happened. The water in the river has eroded the nearby land, which has made the river a lot wider. Okay, although this is a very far away picture, you can actually tell that the river channel is wider. And this is because of erosion. So erosion of the riverbanks has widened the river channel. Rivers often tend to meander during the middle course. Now you remember that word meander, which was one of our key vocabulary words, and that just means the winding curves or bends of a river. And you can see here the river is bending quite a lot. Maybe you've heard of this river. This river is called the River Nile, and it's one of the longest rivers in the world, if not the longest. It's either the River Nile or the Amazon. Maybe you can find that out for me at home. The river channel has also deepened, so it's much deeper. A larger river channel means that there is less friction, so the water flows faster. So that's the reason why the water flows faster, is because it has a lot more space to flow faster. Okay. Finally, we come to the lower course, which is an old age river. Okay, now the lower course of the river, think of it as an old man or an old woman. Okay, they're reaching the end of their lives, and so is this river. When the river reaches the lower course, it is called an old river. The river again still erodes the surrounding land and becomes much, much wider than before. So if you compare how wide this river is here, this part of the river is, and you can see it here, and you compare it to here, you can see that when the river reaches the lower course or its old age, it's much wider than before. This can also lead to floodplains. Okay, and floodplains is when the river starts to overspill on the nearby land. The end of the river is called the mouth. So I'm just going to highlight the mouth using a different color blue. This is the end of the river, and it's called the river mouth. And this is when it joins the sea, ocean, or a lake. And you can see here it's joining the sea. Here is a river that we looked at in our, I think it was our first or second week, and it's the River Danube. Okay, and you can see the River Danube is reaching its mouth here. It's meeting and joining on with a larger pool of water, which is the sea. Fantastic. Okay, so hopefully you've understood that. We've now reached your second activity. For your second activity, you are going to describe the river's journey. So, using the pictures, stage 1, I want you to describe the river's journey using these key words. Okay? You only need to do 2 sentences for each stage. So for stage 1, I'm going to pick up the key words. I know if it's describing the young river's journey, this is going to be, is it the upper course, lower course, or middle course? Which one is it? I think it's the upper course. So I know that this is the upper course. Think about how the water flows in the upper course. Think about what it meets. Waterfalls. It's very steep gradients. Okay, it's on hilly and rocky land. Think about how narrow. Is it narrow or is it wide, the channel of the river? Pause the video so that you can write 2 sentences describing the young river's journey. Next, we have the second stage, stage number 2. In this stage, you need to describe the middle of the river's journey. Okay, so think about what happens in the middle course when the river reaches middle age. Think about all these bends. Think about how wide the river channel is. What's happened to the nearby land to allow the river to expand? Okay, pause the video so that you can write 2 sentences on the middle of the river's journey. Great work so far. You've only got 1 more to do. Stage number 3, or the third stage, is describing the lower course or an old age river's journey. Okay, I'm going to make this picture slightly larger. Think about what happens. Look at the size of the river channel here. What has happened? Has it expanded? Has it narrowed? And finally, what happens at the end of the river's journey? What is this part called? You should know from when you labelled it, where the river meets a larger pool of water and what happens to the river. Pause the video so you can write 2 sentences on the end of the river's journey, which is called the lower course or an old age river. Fantastic. Okay, we've reached the end of our geography lesson. Really well done, because it's quite difficult labeling all the different parts of a river. They've got very technical names, but I'm really impressed with the work you've done so far. So make sure you upload your work onto Seesaw so that your teachers can see that for themselves and mark it and give you feedback on that. Really well done, and I'll see you in the next geography lesson. Bye, Year 3.